Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey everybody, we're jumping in here today. It is Ray and I on the podcast, and we are doing just like a little fun bonus episode. We decided that each of us would be doing kind of one on something that we are excited about, and maybe we've not covered in the podcast, and we're not quite ready to flush it all out. But it's just something that intrigues us, excites us, gives us something to think about. So you'll be hearing these from time to time. And hopefully it's just something that makes you smile, maybe makes you think a little bit, or sends you down a rabbit hole, which I think is what happens to me when I hear episodes like this. But I won't carry on too long because Ray is our main focus today, and he's got some cool stuff, and I'm excited to hear about all the fun things he's talking about.
Yeah, we kind of wanted to visit with you guys today. Instead of completely skipping episodes during the holiday season or just after the holiday season, in this case, we wanted to go ahead and do some shorter episodes and get those in, around the 20-minute mark, and just talk about some more personal topics, professional and personal topics, some special interest topics, but that's what today's all about. But more specifically, what today is about for me is thinking back on some of my personal experiences growing up and professional experiences when I was an agent in the eastern part of the state here in Kentucky. The county that I'm in now, it's interesting, the county that I'm in now in the central part of Kentucky is the least forested county in the state of Kentucky. Not a lot of continuous tracts of woodland here in Bourbon County, Kentucky. But one of my former counties that I was in as a extension agent here in Kentucky was Floyd County, which is in the eastern foothills of the state. And it was 84% forested. So obviously forestry there and forestry related topics was a huge issue for us. Having forest land cover so much of the total land in the county and in the state of Kentucky, I guess almost half of the state of Kentucky is forested. I think it's like 48, a little over 48%. And forestry is a huge industry in Kentucky. I think 2016, 2017 numbers were like $13 billion, just a massive industry. So obviously forestry was an important part of my job there, and I worked within that topic. But as a side shoot off of that topic, I also did special programming in non-timber forestry products. And not to complicate matters, but basically that was anything that related to forestry or silviculture. Sometimes we call forestry silviculture related activities, but it was anything forestry related that was not directly related to the sale of timber. That's a well-established industry here in Kentucky and a big industry, but there's all these other products that can come from the woods or you can derive from woodlands that doesn't have anything to do with that. And once again, I'm going to draw on some of my kind of personal experiences with these products. And there's lots of products out there, and I'm not going to try to today in 20
so
minutes
many,
cover. Oh my gosh, there's so many. But today I'm not going to try to cover every single product. But one example that I'll throw out there that a lot of times we forget about: when we were growing up, we sold a lot of firewood as a supplemental income because it seems like, and I worked with in my job, my professional experiences, I worked with people that had firewood businesses that would either sell and deliver firewood, or have people come pick up the firewood, or they would sell firewood for like campfires, and they would sell that to vendors that then would sell that to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something we don't often think about. That's not necessarily
Yeah.
a pure timber product, but firewood is one of those things that is pretty common in the East. We still have a lot of folks that burn firewood, but it was a pretty good product for us growing up on the farm. Our farm had a lot of timberland, and so we sold a lot of firewood, and it was a great product for us. And it's a good activity. If you're doing timber stand improvement activities, that means you usually have a lot of low quality trees on your property that's never going to make good timber. And one of the things that you can do with those, when you thin them out, you have to figure out kind of what to do with that material. You can't, obviously, if you have a large woodlot, you can't burn all of that wood realistically yourself. So what do you do with it? And one of the things that we did with it was we would cut that wood for firewood. We would split it up and we would store it. But that's an example that I can think of in the past
Do you
as a non-timber forestry product.
Do you think that that has changed with kind of the introduction of all these invasive species that we see? Like the emerald ash borer, they were all saying
Mhm.
burn it where you buy it kind of thing, which, if
Yeah.
you're buying it to go camping, or you're just buying it from your neighbor for your house, then obviously it's not a big deal. But
There's lots of regulations, yeah, on that, and you have to be very aware of that. In fact, you have to use some. I mean, if you have ash and it has a known problem with an invasive species like the ash borer, you have to use that in the same general area. You can't transport it outside of the area. You have to use it in place in the same area that it comes from. So yeah, those are issues now. Though now there's ways for big commercial producers that are in
hmm
other parts of the country. They may be doing this on a large scale. There's some kiln drying operations
hmm
that you can certify that that wood is insect free. There's some things that you can do, but that usually only applies to the big producers
yeah.
of those products. But yeah, there's some special regulations. And you'll find I'll mention several times during our brief conversation today that if you have any regulatory related questions, yeah, always call the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. It usually always goes back to them when it's a regulation based question. So just kind of keep that in mind, Kentucky Department of Agriculture. If you have questions and you're doing something like selling firewood and you're wondering if something is regulated in your area, give them a call.
hmm
Definitely.
Office of State Entomologist Office handles a lot of stuff
Hmm.
there through KDA. They're on UK's campus, but they're really awesome people and
Yeah, they're
really
very
helpful.
knowledgeable,
So,
and they work hand in hand with the actual regulators at KDA, and
hmm
they can help you out or refer you to the specific office
hmm
that can help you out. But that's one example of a non-timber forestry
builds
product.
character for young boys out in the wilderness, huh?
Oh, let me tell you what, Alexis. My father said, he told us that it would build character as we split cords and cords and cords of firewood by hand. But it's weird that when my older brother and I went away to school, that he got a pneumatic wood splitter. Interesting. He got a round beller. We used to do square bale hay, and he got a round
Uh-huh.
beller and he got a wood splitter when his free labor went to college in the form of my brother and I. So yeah, it's funny how that works. Yeah,
What, your younger brother wasn't punished the way you were?
no, he came later, so he lucked out of that whole thing somehow. For the most part, he did a little bit of that, but not commercially like we were just splitting truckloads and truckloads of wood. But yeah, it's a character building, all right, and it toughens up your hands a whole lot. It's an interesting endeavor for sure, but it's good cardio. It
There
builds
you go.
muscle, that's for sure.
There you go.
Another thing I guess I was involved with, and it kind of goes along right along with firewood. If you're improving your timber stand, if you have a woodlot, and I had about 60 acres when I lived, 60, 70 acres of woodland personally. And one of the things that I did with non-timber forestry products is I had a small scale shiitake operation where I grew
Cool.
shiitake mushrooms, where you would fresh cut logs.
Mhm.
They can't be dead standing; they have to be, in good shape, bark intact, and you cut those and around late February, early March, and then you inoculate those with commercially available mushroom spawn. And here in the state, we have a lot of publications and extension
Mhm.
on small scale shiitake operations using natural logs. That's some of the keywords you would look up: Kentucky shiitake mushroom production, natural logs, because there's different commercially available ways of
Mhm.
growing mushrooms, but this specific one was very suitable for what I was doing, because as I was doing timber stand improvement, I had lots of small oak trees that I was thinning out. And some of those were split up with firewood, into firewood, but others were smaller, 4 to 6 inches in diameter. So I'd cut those up into about 48-inch lengths, and I would inoculate those, drill and go through this process of inoculating those and grow shiitake mushrooms. And those logs were good for several years. But that was a pretty good operation for me. And it was an interesting one because at the time there was a pretty good local market for shiitake mushrooms. And I think there still is. There's people still around the state of Kentucky that grow
Yeah.
mushrooms. I don't know anybody in your area, Alexis, that does that sort of thing. There's a
Um,
few left around.
yeah, there's a couple farms that'll do them as part of their CSA. We've got two mushroom growers at our farmers market who are doing
Mm.
more indoor mushroom production. So I
Yeah,
don't
I
think they're
like.
doing as many logs. I did logs for the first time this year, and like for my own personal, and that was fun. We had a big tree come down in the front of our house, and it was a maple, which isn't the best for shiitake production, but it was, down. There was kind of no choice, and so I thought, well, I feel bad this tree's down, and so we ended up, and I've harvested from them already. That
Oh,
was in
really?
Yeah, that was in March, and I did a pretty decent harvest off of the past, I guess, last month or something like that. So I'm excited to see what happens in the springtime when their big flush comes out. But that was so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that on a personal scale with 2 or 3 logs,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
or you can do it on a larger scale, and there's a system, whereby
Mhm.
there's soaking and, you're on an 8-week production cycle and you produce 3 times a year, or you can just let it naturally happen in the spring, 1 flush, in the fall, 1 flush.
Mhm.
But it was an interesting fit for me because it was taking a waste product that I was cutting out of my
Mhm.
woodlot and using that, and it's small diameter logs. It's logs that you can
Right.
typically move around and manage.
Right.
Now, you don't have if you have a large chunk of wood, you can just drill it in place and leave it if it's in a shady location that, where the humidity's high.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a neat operation. I really enjoyed my time producing mushrooms, and I worked with local producers, 2 or 3 local producers at the time in the eastern part of the state that was growing those for farmers markets. And I've worked with a couple in the central part of the state,
Mhm.
but it was a great operation. I really enjoyed it. It was a good product. I enjoyed the product personally. It was really good in noodles,
Yeah.
and you can, make lots of yummy recipes. I just love mushrooms. But
Mhm.
that's you actually going and going through a cultivation process for those mushrooms using non-timber
Right, you're
forestry
like
products.
farming them essentially,
You
yeah.
far Yeah, exactly, Alexis, farming them. But now there's also a longstanding tradition, at least where I come from, and I know all across the state and other states that surround us, of hunting and foraging
Mhm.
for wild mushrooms. Which I
Mhm.
always put a disclaimer in here.
Know what you're doing.
You really need to know what you're doing. If you are not an expert in that, I caution you because you can get yourself into trouble. But there are some mushrooms that are more distinct that I think were popular where I grew up, like morels, for instance.
Mhm.
There's a long stand for personal consumption. A lot of families would hunt those, and morels. Wild morels, when they're professionally foraged, are worth. They're a pretty pricey product. They're a
Mhm.
great product. So that's an example of a mushroom that doesn't lend itself well to like a farming operation,
Mhm.
but you go out and hunt those things naturally, and they can be a pretty good product for you. But not. I was talking with Alexis before we jumped on here today. One of the biggest themes with everything that I'm going to tell you today, non-timber forestry products, is sustainability has
Mhm.
to be built into everything you do when we're talking about all of these wild foraged products or these products that come out of woodlands because it's so easy to over harvest something to the point to
Right.
where you kind of damage the long-term availability of that product. And the classic example I'll give there is something like ginseng.
Mm.
Medicinal herbs are still a big business in Kentucky, wild grown medicinal herbs, and a highly regulated crop. It had to be highly regulated, would be an example of that would be ginseng, where only certified buyers can purchase that, and it needs to be harvested during a very specific season. And there's all of these regulations in place to ensure the long term viability of that native crop, because
Right.
it's very easy to over harvest that and you just kind of do away with it. And we did harvest personally a lot of herbs growing up, bloodroot, ginseng, golden seal, sassafras leaves, and ginseng, and a few other things. We did harvest those, and my father was pretty good about only taking a percentage of the crop. And we would not only harvest those off of our own property, but we had lots of friends that lived around us that we
Mhm.
could get permission to go on their land and harvest some of these wild crops. And then you go this whole process of drying them down to the a specific level that's going to work for the buyer. And then there were some wholesale buyers there. That was couple of wholesale buyers at
Mhm.
the time that was around us, and they would buy during specific times of the year. And I remember the smell of like bags and bags, these big bags of dried sassafras leaves. It smelled so good, like the best tea ever. we would take that to market, or we'd take dried bloodroot, and
Uh-huh.
I remember the color of that and the texture. But we sold a lot of those crops. But you have to be very careful not to over harvest those. And if you have questions, you can call your local extension office. And if you want to know more about the regulations of something like ginseng, that's pretty darn specific. Call KDA, and we do have some information on
Would
that at
you
the university. But yeah,
Yeah, would you
KDA.
say like what a good like rule of thumb, like if I see a stand of chicken of the woods mushrooms or something, if I
Hmm.
take a third of that whole stand, is that would you see that as sustainable, or like kind of what's your rule of
Well,
thumb?
in general, that's just you need to leave a percentage of whatever you're taking, because it kind of
Sure.
goes to just common knowledge. Mushrooms are a little bit different since they're kind of the outward expression of the actual mushroom
Fungus, right.
fungus that's underground. But still, don't want to harvest 100% of anything, because
Mm.
you're just
How does it
basically going
spread?
to, yeah, that's how it spreads. And if you harvest all the top growth, the spreading mechanism of something like chicken of the woods, a mushroom, for example, it's not going to spread anymore, and you're going to deplete it. So you need to know the specific crop, how much you can harvest, when you can harvest, and you just don't over harvest if you want to have future harvest of that. And that's a common thread in non-timber forestry products. And I saw a lot of people get into trouble with that, because you'll go into a woodlot and it'll be very productive with whatever you're harvesting, whether it's grapevines or greenery or mushrooms or whatever we're talking about. But it's just so easy to go in and clean everything out, then you're not going to have anything left for the future. So that's a common theme in non-timber forestry products, is sustainability. And it's one you can't cheat on,
Right.
because the
Comes
forestry
back to bite you.
environment, yeah, the forestry environment works as a complete ecosystem, and it's a shady environment. So if you're talking about plants, they don't replenish quite as quickly as our sun-loving plants on average. So if you overharvest them, it's really, really tough on
Not much
those
slower.
plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, they replenish slower. So you have to be cautious about that. But that's just some examples of non-timber forestry products. There's lots of others, like black walnuts. I consider that a
Mm.
non-timber forestry product. All the herbs, we mentioned that, but even things like berries, blackberries and raspberries, harvest a ton of those wild blackberries growing up. And I was an enterprising individual. Even as an 11-year-old, I would go out, and there was reclaimed strip mine areas that had lots of sunlight exposure, and just acres of blackberries.
Yeah.
Some raspberries, but acres of blackberries. And I harvested, I can't tell you, just gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons every year, when I was up until I was a middle teenage years, and sold those. And they sold very well, because I don't know about you guys, but there's a big difference in cultivars of blackberries, and wild blackberries have a specific place in my heart.
Yeah.
I love wild blackberries, but I had access to acres, and it was to the point to where I would keep my paths open, because this reclaimed fringes of a mined area that joined part of our that was on our property. It was an old reclaimed mine area that had good sun exposure, but it started to all grow up. It
Yeah.
went through succession, and you couldn't get through there. And I was like, I can't let that happen. So I had little paths that I kept mowed
Yeah.
down. But that was a non-timber forestry product, berries. And I did just very kind of crude management in keeping the paths open for those. That's only management I did, but I would collect, I don't know, 50, 60 gallons a year off of those. And it was great supplemental income for a 13-year-old, 11, 13-year-old.
Fun fact,
Yeah,
if you
good
ever go on a
times.
road trip with Ray, he does pull over for berry patches. So if it is on the public right of way, if there are berries there, he will pull over and you
Yes.
will pick them with
I
him.
had forgotten about that, but I will pull over. In fact, I wish I had a bumper sticker that said, "We'll break for berries."
Love it. Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah.
cute.
Yeah, that was fun, and I will stop if it's wild blackberries, Alexis. Yes, I had completely forgotten. I believe that was Land Between the Lakes. That was a
Yeah.
good trip.
Yeah,
But I will break for berries. But that's another great example of a non-timber forestry
we
product.
rolled
And
into a thing and we were all like had the berry stained lips
yeah.
and fingers and stuff and
Oh,
everyone was like,
yeah,
"Where
our
have you
lips were
been?"
stained with berries. I mean, people probably
Your
thought we were a
fingers were
side.
like red. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and we rolled up, and that stain, just, for reference, that stain doesn't come off easy. When you get those berry stains, like, you have to pretty much
It's war
wear it
paint.
off.
It's fine.
It is, it's good. It is good stuff. Just another great example of a non-timber forestry product,
Yeah.
and they're everywhere. They're
Yeah.
everywhere.
Maybe we can expand on some of those, like, in particular in the future. Mushrooms are fascinating. A lot of people have
Oh,
interest in
yeah,
that. I've got a
yeah.
lot of friends who mushroom hunt and are experts in that. So maybe that's a
Yeah, I
future
would love to hear
episode.
more about that myself. I've never ventured out beyond, like, morels or things
Mhm.
that I'm cultivating,
Mhm.
myself that I've,
It's scary.
seeded. Yeah, I don't get too creative with that. I do, hunt morels myself, and I grew my own shiitakes, but that was a known quantity that I had specific spawn for, but yeah, I don't get too creative on that, but just remember non-timber forestry products. There's a lot of stuff in the woods. And if you have a large uninterrupted woodlot or even a smaller woodlot, just kind of think of it in those terms. There's lots of stuff out there, folks. And if you're trying to have some supplemental
Mhm.
income or seasonal income, I used to work obviously a lot more with people that did that sort of thing. And, things like honeybees, I even considered them honey almost a non-timber forestry product because you could put those on the fringe of woods. And in the eastern part of the state, we've got this long history, this lore behind like Lynn honey or
Oh,
all the
yeah.
different like honeys that we love, like
Uh-huh.
black locust honey, and you would have these pure runs of this very light colored honey that was just so good. But even honey I considered almost a very appropriate non-timber forestry product where I was at in the eastern part of the state. So lots of great examples of non-timber forestry products.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed our little quickie episode. Maybe it made you curious. That's my hope, is our episodes make you a little bit curious, learn something new, learn something fun that we are passionate about personally and hope to expand on in the future. So follow us on Instagram at Horticulture Podcast. You can also leave us a review, and you can shoot us an email if you're like, yes, Alexis, I want to hear Ray talk to me more about shiitake production. So if you want to hear something like that, feel free to shoot us an email at horticulturepodcast at l.uky.edu. That's in the show notes. We hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and join us next time for another mini episode. Have a great day, y'all.